Hello everyone, and welcome to Evalectica. In this video, I will discuss the question of whether biology possesses universal laws, and if not, how we might begin to construct a formal language capable of expressing such laws within a postulational framework. Before we begin, a brief clarification. My presentation should not be interpreted as direct reports of existing research findings. Rather, they represent independent, logical, and creative synthesis or attempts to process scientific ideas within a coherent conceptual system. The first topic is the problem of laws in biology. The notion of law implies universality, necessity, and exceptionlessness. In physics and chemistry, laws are expressed through mathematical formalisms that capture invariant relationships under all conditions. However, whether biology can or should possess such laws have different schools of thoughts. A common argument in favor of the existence of biological laws points to Mendel's laws of inheritance and other principles that are derived from the laws of physics and chemistry. Yet, when examined through the lens of modern biology, these so-called laws prove to be context-dependent and riddled with exceptions, especially the Mendel's laws. The law of segregation. During the gamete formation, the alleles for each gene segregate so that each gamete carries only one allele for each gene. In contemporary genetics, this principle is only conditionally valid. Many traits are polygenic, controlled by multiple genes, while individual genes often exhibit polytropy influencing several traits simultaneously. Thus, Mendel's assumption of a linear one-to-one correspondence between gene and phenotype is no longer tenable. The law of independent assortment. Genes for different traits segregate independently during gamete formation. This principle fails in cases of genetic linkage, where multiple genes reside on the same chromosome and therefore do not assort independently. The presence of linkage effectively constrains the independence assumed in Mendel's formulation. The law of dominance. Some alleles are dominant while others are recessive. An organism expressing at least one dominant allele will exhibit the dominant trait. Modern genetics has documented numerous violations of this rule, including incomplete dominance, codominance, and cases where recessive alleles can reappear as dominant under specific epigenetic or environmental conditions. In summary, Mendelian principles are not universal laws, but rather special cases that hold within restricted contexts. A scientific law must apply under all conceivable conditions, independent of historical or environmental variation. Mendel's reasoning was limited by categorical assumption that traits such as color or form could be linearly mapped to discrete genetic determinants, thereby neglecting the crucial role of environmental and systemic interactions. Why biology resists making laws? Unlike physics or chemistry, biology deals with systems that are open, historical, and multifactorial. Living organisms are in constant interaction with their environments. They are both shaped by and reactive to external and internal contingencies. This contextual fluidity undermines the formulation of timeless and absolute laws. In physics, the law describes what must happen under given conditions. In biology, what happens is always modulated by adaptation and variation. Hence, biology lacks the kinds of universality that physical law exhibit, not because it's less rigorous, but because its subject matter is inherently dynamic and context-dependent. The need for a new biological language. Despite this, biology does not lack structure. It may instead require a new descriptive framework, a language capable of representing living systems in terms of their formal, structural, and dynamic properties, rather than through statistical or phenomenological summaries. Mathematical models already exist across various subfields: population genetics, ecology, biochemistry, but these models are local and domain specific. What biology lacks is an universal syntax capable of integrating these domains under shared principles. Developing such a language would not only unify biological knowledge, but also transform biology into formalizable science, one where theoretical constructs can be tested, compared, and extended systematically, much like equations in physics. A linguistic framework for biology would standardize experimental description, increase reproducibility, and clarify the logical dependencies between biological entities and processes. It would turn empirical complexity into conceptual order. Foundational postulates of proposed biological language. To initiate such a framework, I propose several postulates, foundational principles that serve as axioms for describing life. Postulate 1. The domain of biology. Biology is the science that investigates systems exhibiting the properties of life. This postulate establishes the domain of the discourse. All subsequent principles, definitions, and operations apply exclusively to elements within the set. Postulate 2. The negentropic nature of life. A living system is an internally coherent and bounded whole that sustains its organization against the natural increase of entropy, functioning as local negentropic process. Here, life is conceptualized as anti-entropic persistence, the continuous re-establishment of order through a dynamic exchange with the environment. Postulate 3. The necessity of dynamic interaction. A living system cannot be completely isolated from its surroundings. It must continuously interact with external systems through exchanges of matter, energy, or information. These postulates assert dynamism as the universal property of life. Isolation contradicts the very definition of the living state. Postulate 4. The Bioport postulate. Necessary interface. If a living subsystem A and an open subsystem B exist, and if the transfer of matter or information occurs between them, such transfer must be mediated by a distinct structural entity termed bioport. A bioport is defined as a specialized topological structure that enables selective communication between otherwise incompatible domains, internal and external environments. Only a limited number of topological configurations can fulfill these requirements, implying that the geometry of life's interfaces is fundamentally constrained. The bioport, therefore, represents as a universal topological necessity of living systems, a manifestation of this principle that life must preserve its internal unity while maintaining the openness to external input. Although living systems display near infinite diversity, they all must satisfy the minimal set of constraints defined by postulates. By abstracting these constraints into formal primitives, we can begin to construct a universal biological language, one that describes the invariant features of life beyond the empirical contingencies of species or environments. The Bioport is the first proposed unit of this emerging syntax. It is both a conceptual and structural element, a minimal interface through which the continuity of life becomes possible. For such elements, a larger geometrical and semantic system of biology could, in principle, be derived. In conclusion, the absence of universal laws in biology may not reflect the impossibility of formalization, but rather the inadequacy of existing linguistic and mathematical tools to describe living complexity. By constructing an axiomatic framework, a biological language grounded in postulates rather than equations, we might recover the universality that has long eluded biological theory. This approach aims not to reduce life to mechanics but to articulate its structural necessity, the geometry, logic, and continuity that define what it means to be alive. Thank you for watching my video. I hope this exploration into the possibility of a new biological language provides both a conceptual and philosophical foundation for thinking about the future of theoretical biology.